So it should be going live any second now, but it's being.
It should be going live any second now.
Hi everyone.
But it's being. It should be going live any second now.
Just trying to get it all up and running. My Wi-Fi was just going weirdly slow for a bit. My Wi-Fi was just going weirdly slow for a bit.
We are live on Twitch.
Cool. Okay. So yay. Hello, everyone. Sorry, we're a few minutes late. Clearly fun times trying to get live on things. So I think we're live on everything now.
Not quite. Still working on it.
And we are live on YouTube.
Wonderful. My Restream says 3 out of 3. So according to Restream, we're live on everything now. So hello, everybody. Welcome to our SASA archaeogaming live event, which is our first live event. Yay. Woo. Thank you all for coming. Just to introduce things a little bit. Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm the live events coordinator. If anyone is coming from the reading groups, thank you for joining us. You guys all remember me from being in every single reading group all the time. So yeah, let me think about how we need to introduce this. Our lovely hosts over here are going to be the ones actually introducing to you what archaeogaming and everything is, since I'm not an expert in this. I'm just going to really quickly introduce some live event things with SASA. Go to saveancientstudies.org and check out everything, but specifically on the events page, you can find our live events, which are every Saturday or 3 Saturdays a month at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we have a few different things. This is, as I said, our first one is archaeogaming. Then we also, next week, we are doing our book club, which our first book club is Cara Cooney's When Women Rule the World. So Cara Cooney will be on doing a live author Q&A with actually Christian Casey, who is one of our people here today, will be hosting that, asking her questions. And then we also have a live, like Ask an Expert Q&A, where we have a few different experts coming in on different topics. So our one for this month is about women in the ancient world, is the most general way I'm going to say it instead of reading off the whole thing about it. So check out our live events page and RSVP to those. They are also all live streamed on the different platforms that we're live streaming on right now. Small disclaimer, going forward, we will probably only have archaeogaming live streamed on Twitch, and then we'll upload the videos to Facebook and YouTube after the streaming is done, because it is apparently very hard to stream archaeogaming to those other platforms, or gaming in general. But the other events will all be streamed on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. So, and then of course, on the main event on Zoom as well. So that's really all I have to say. Also, when you're on our website, become a member and subscribe to the newsletter, and you will get the SASA Oracle, which goes out on the 1st of each month with all the information about the events that month, the new projects that we have, calls for interns, and different ways that you can get involved with SASA in general. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have. I will introduce our lovely host for today for our archaeogaming event, which is, by the way, Assassin's Creed Origins. I don't know if I actually said that yet. We will be playing Assassin's Creed Origins with Tine Rassalle, Jessica Tomkins. They're next to me over here, so that's why I'm pointing this way. Jessica Tomkins and Christian Casey. So I'm pretty much just gonna hop off and let them introduce themselves more specifically and get into gameplay. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, sure, I can start. Hi, my name is Tine, welcome. I am going to be one of your hosts for this hopefully entire academic year, where we will be hosting archaeogaming sessions with a focus on video games that take place in the ancient world. So we are hoping to have an event once a month, always on a Saturday, where we have guests, players, gamers come in and they play a game that is set in the ancient world. That could be ancient Greece, ancient Rome, Egypt, Mesoamerica, ancient Near East, etc. And they are always going to be specialists in their field, as in they know this ancient world that they are playing in, and they can give comments and they can explain the choices that the video game designers made in portraying these ancient worlds, etc., etc. So hopefully We get another couple of players in the fall, and then also a couple of ones in the spring. Me personally, I am an archaeologist focusing on the ancient Near East. I have a master's in archaeology of the ancient Near East from university in Belgium, and then an additional degree in Hebrew and Aramaic from a university in the Netherlands. And I'm currently a PhD candidate, hopefully finishing up my dissertation this year at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in the US. And I focus mostly on biblical archaeology. And by that, I mean the material culture of ancient Judaism and early Christianity in Syria, Palestine, Israel region. I hosted a reading group this summer on the Dead Sea Scrolls, which I hope to repeat again in maybe the December or next summer. But I'm also very interested in video games. I've always been playing video games. I love video games. And over the last couple of years, I've discovered that there is this intersection of video games and the ancient world, which is, of course, super fascinating to me. I am very much interested in translating academic knowledge to a general public, by which I mean us people in the academic world tend to talk to each other, and we make discoveries and we write books that are very difficult to read. But the general public hardly ever hears the results of our enterprises, of our excavations, etc. And so I'm very interested in anything that has to do with public humanities, museums, making of documentaries, where we can explain our findings to the public. And I feel like video games are a great medium to do this. More and more people are playing video games. The video game industry is now bigger than the music and movie industry. And it's a great platform to portray the ancient world and to show people what we know about the ancient world through our studies. And so I'm very fascinated by that aspect. And that is one of the reasons why I wanted to host these archaeogaming sessions, to show the world what is possible and what we actually can do and learn from and with video games. So hopefully this will be a success, and we'll see how it goes. Christian, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. My name is Christian Casey. I recently finished a PhD in Egyptology, and I'm currently a postdoc at ISAL. And I'm just, Tina and I share a lot of the same interests. I'm really interested in how the study of the ancient world reaches the public. Can y'all hear the game sounds while I'm speaking?
I do not.
Okay, good. Just making sure. So yeah, I'm really interested in how we reach the public, and I think video games are an important way to do that. I'm particularly fascinated with Assassin's Creed Origins because it provides so much in the way of immersive experience. You're on the ground in ancient Egypt, and even though it's a fictional version of ancient Egypt, there are still very real consequences for us in terms of how we think about the place. And I'm going to be playing the game. I'll just give you a quick disclaimer. It took us forever to get this set up because we tried a million different things. The way it's working right now is I'm using PlayStation Remote Play on my laptop, and I'm going to be sharing my screen. I think I'm having Wi-Fi issues because the connection is a little laggy, but we should still be able to look at things. So I'll hand it over to Jess for an introduction.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jessica Tomkins. I also finished a PhD in Egyptology at Brown with Christian a couple years ago. I am currently visiting assistant professor of history at Oglethorpe University, which is a little liberal arts college in Atlanta, Georgia. And I will admit that I have less experience with archaeogaming than Tina and Christian do, but hopefully I can give some good commentary and answer your questions on Egyptology and ancient Egypt as we walk through the game. My personal research and academic interests are on the Old Kingdom, which is the Pyramid Age in ancient Egypt, and looking at power relations between the capital, the central government, and provincial governments out in the countryside. So hopefully maybe we can get into a little bit of that if we walk around, depending on where Christian takes us. But yeah, that's me. Happy to answer any questions as they come up. Bring them all in.
Okay, so I think we're ready. We've done a fair bit of introductions. I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop, and then we should all be here. Can everyone hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Do you hear the gameplay also?
No.
No.
No. Okay, let me see if I can. I hear the gameplay a lot, so I'm going to try to fix that very quickly so that I can still hear you all talking. Where is? Where is the volume? I guess it's probably in the game settings. Can everyone see this?
We see you fiddling around with the sound, Christian.
Yeah, I'm trying to turn it down because I can't actually hear anyone talking because it's so loud.
Oh.
Okay, that's something we didn't notice in our setup. It didn't seem to be a problem before, actually, but oh well. Okay, so got that sorted out. And now we are in, shoot. There's gotta be a way to stop that. I know y'all can't hear it, but there's like, no, not that. There's a lot of people talking and they're like talking on top of each other. And it's like impossible to hear anything else. Okay, looks like that's the best I can do. Okay, so we are in Memphis, and I chose this place just because it's kind of the center of the main game map. So this is the map. It is Memphis, the Fayoum, and Lower Egypt, goes all the way to Alexandria, and then all the way to Cyrenaica in the west, which actually wasn't part of Egypt proper. It was a separate, like sometimes Ptolemaic province, and then Siwa, of course, and you start out in Siwa. So that's the Lower Egyptian part of the map, and this place where we are right now is the Temple of Ptah in Memphis. So yeah, I could go anywhere in the game we want to. I just started us here because I thought this is kind of a neat thing to look at.
Christian,
and I'm just going to.
Could you give us a little bit of background on what this game is, when it was made, what the goal is for people who aren't familiar with it?
Sure. So the game is an Assassin's Creed game in this long-running series by Ubisoft. It came out in, correct me if I'm wrong, 2017, end of 2017, I think.
Good.
I know I wrote that down.
Sounds about right.
So it's a couple years old now. But in making the game, they worked really hard to get as much historical accuracy as they could. They had to do a lot of reconstruction. So here in the Temple of Ptah, there's this huge like Apis bull statue. We don't actually have any of this. All of this is under the city of Cairo now. But I think they did a pretty good job. Okay, so let's see. I'm gonna find, there's a neat thing in here, if I can find it, the Apis bull enclosure. Jess, do you want to tell us about the Apis bull?
Absolutely. Sorry, I'm just sending you a quick message about what I'm seeing on my screen. Where have you gone now? So you were in the Temple of Ptah?
Yeah, I still am. It's like this huge complex. And I was just heading over to the Apis bull enclosure because I thought that would be cool to look at.
I am having a really hard time seeing this gameplay. It's super.
I think this has to do with us trying to broadcast this on YouTube and Facebook.
Yeah, it's really
Just
pixelated
going
when
to
you do.
Twitch.
Yeah. In future live gaming sessions, we'll come up with a different system. I think it's better just to stream directly from the PlayStation to Twitch, because then the quality is really, really clear.
Mhm.
But can you see like a little building in
Yeah,
front?
when you stand still, it's great.
Okay, I'll try not to move around too much. I'll just find nice sort of set pieces that we
just
can
take a
stand in
second
front
when
of.
you're at something you want to talk to and just kind of keep it steady.
Okay, so this is the Apis bull enclosure. They had to reimagine this because we don't actually have an Apis bull enclosure, but we do have some Apis bull stuff. In particular, I'm thinking of the Ramesseum, which I learned fairly recently is like a hot topic for conspiracy theorists. Have y'all heard about this?
No.
No.
There's like all the big like bull sarcophagi. And apparently conspiracy theorists believe that it's like a cover story, that it was used to house the mummified Apis bull. I've had several people ask me about it, like, well, what do you know about the Ramesseum?
Well, I think you should back up here and give a little bit of context. So Apis bulls are these mammoth bulls, right, that are being deified and worshipped in Egypt, with one at a time. And then when they died, there was a huge fanfare for these bulls. They were mummified, and huge, sarcophagus was made out of stone for them, like you would, imagine for a person. So a big sarcophagus, but to house an entire bull. And then they're all put in these underground catacombs. So you've got all of these Apis bulls, generation, kind of next to each other. So you have these huge catacombs of these absolutely mammoth sarcophagi.
Yeah.
So what is
like
the
stone coffins for a bull?
Yeah, but we don't have the remains in them. So they're just, I don't think any remains were found in any of them, right?
I remember something about like they found bits and pieces, but they didn't actually find a fully mummified bull.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people who really enjoy these ancient Egypt conspiracy theories, those are always the kind of things they pick up on. They pick up on like, oh, well, there isn't actually the remains of one. So it could be anything. And it's like, well, I mean, okay, fair enough. But we do have like numerous texts describing this. There are texts inside that say what the things are for. And we have, historical documents. And when you take them all together, it paints a really clear picture of what was going on. There was this sacred bull who was sacred to the god Ptah. And Ptah, his name means engraver, and he was the god of like crafting things. And in one cosmology, he's the creator deity, like the god who creates the whole world. And
for sculptors especially, he's a patron, so sculpting out of stone.
Right. Yeah, so they sculpted a lot of Apis bulls in his honor. And then the Apis bull is like his sort of animal avatar on the earth. And they would find this bull after one of them died. They would go find the new one. I think it had to be born on the day that the other one died, and it had to have all these specific features. Like I think it had to have like a white diamond.
Yeah,
white forehead. Is that correct?
Patches. Yeah, on his head.
So it was like a big black bull with a white something on its forehead. And then that would become the new incarnation of the god. And it was housed in the temple and basically treated like royalty. And that's where we are right now. So if I try to keep things as steady as possible,
So
I'm going to do a little bit of driving around.
Do you encounter the bull in the game as well at some point, like the living bull?
Yeah, so he's involved in a quest where I think someone is trying to poison him. Okay, so I just flew above the temple with Senu, and I'm gonna try to hold it still here for a second. So you can see this really nice, like courtyard with a pool in the middle surrounded by palm trees with the little building on the lower right, in the lower right quadrant. That's the Apis Bulls enclosure. So it's kind of like a stone stable, and it's part of the temple complex. But Tina, do you remember what happens in that quest where you have to?
I haven't played that quest. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
I haven't
I
either. I've
think-
only done the one where they tried to poison Sobek's crocodiles.
Well, the Apis Bull one is kind of a reprise of that one. Somebody is, I think, mixing fruit pits into his food. So I think it's like apricot pits or something, which are poisonous. So he's being slowly poisoned. So the Apis Bull is sick, and when you go into this enclosure in the quest, he just looks really sad, and he's like hunched over, and you have to determine that he's being poisoned and like apprehend the poisoners and save the Apis Bull. So that's really cool. I wish I hadn't played it yet, so that when we went in here, the bull would be sitting there. But
you killed him already?
I didn't kill the Apis Bull. I'm not. Who is that? Is it Darius or Cambyses? It's Cambyses who's supposed to have like murdered the Apis Bull.
There's a huge sacrilege.
No.
Gone down in history as a baddie for it.
Yeah. Although they just find another one. So it kind of reminds me, actually, I did my undergrad at UT, and the at University of Texas at Austin, the Longhorn, the mascot is the Longhorns, and they actually have a Longhorn named Bevo. And of course, Longhorns don't live that long, so they just keep getting a new one when he gets old. And when the Longhorn gets old, they have a big barbecue where they eat the old Bevo. And it's like the most Texas thing I've ever heard.
That's horrible.
Yeah. I can't even make that up. It's so ridiculous.
Oh no.
Yeah, so
we actually
Apis Bull.
got a question in from the audience. Somebody's asking what makes this game focusing on ancient Egypt different from other ancient Egypt inspired games.
That's a really good question. That's one that that's what I tried to write about in my paper about this. I basically make the argument that there's something really.
Christian is writing a paper for me. No, we are going to publish a magazine in it's called Near Eastern Archaeology. And it's going to be a magazine issue completely dedicated to archaeogaming and the ancient Near East, and it's going to come out in March. And so we made a selection of 10 articles that have to do something to do with archaeology of the ancient Near East and video games. And so Christian is writing a paper on Assassin's Creed Origins and how it represents Egypt and what we archaeologists can learn from it, and also how we can use the game in our classrooms, etc. So that's what Christian, what you're talking about, right? That article.
Yeah, so stay tuned for that. When does that come out, Tina?
In March. It's about to go to peer review because it does need to get reviewed by other people to make sure the quality is okay. And then it's supposed to be published in March of 2021. Yeah,
I'm probably going to get hammered in peer review, actually, because I make a kind of an outlandish claim. But I'll repeat it here. The basic gist of it is that, Jess and I are both Egyptologists. Tina, you study the ancient Near East. The things that we study are really far away for us. And it takes years and years of studying these things before they start to become real in your minds. And it never really happens all the way. The people of the ancient world, they aren't as like three-dimensional and solid as the people you interact with every day. At least, I'll only speak for myself. For me, the historical people are not as much like real living people as the people I know in my everyday life. Sorry, I'm just trying to get to a place where people aren't talking so I can hear over them.
I'd say because of the time difference, it's also more true as well than if you're thinking of, I don't know, like the Tudor period or, the Civil War or something. There's something about it being so far away chronologically that makes it even more remote. Like it's very difficult to access what it would be like to interact with these people. Even when you see them or read the texts in their own words, there's still that disconnect from really
and you're
believing that somebody real wrote that,
okay. Found a quiet place. So yeah, and that's basically what I've argued, is that there's this distance. You can read the ancient Egyptian text, but you're either reading them in translation, which already creates a distance, or you're reading them in ancient Egyptian, but it's not any of our native language. So there's a disconnect there. There's a huge difference in time. Our world looks totally different. And for us, for Western Egyptologists, there's also just a geographic distance. Being in Egypt is a different experience from being in the United States, and that adds a layer. So there are all of these like layers of separation, and this is the only game set in Egypt where I think you're able to peer through those layers. So there's two parts to that. There's the ability to kind of see the place as you would if you were kind of in a virtual time machine, and then there's the caveat that a lot of this has to be reconstructed because the remains of all of these things don't necessarily survive. Like the place that I'm in right now, the Temple of Ptah and the Apis bull enclosure, we don't have the archaeological remains of this place. So it's kind of made up, but it's well informed. And I argue that the parting of that veil of time and space is such a huge advantage that it offsets the cost of having to sort of speculate about the exact layouts of things. So, if this is the kind of thing that you study, having this opportunity to experience the place, at least secondhand, we've never had that before.
And I think going back to the original question of what makes this one so much better than others is even where you are right now, if you look in the background, there's puddles on the floor, there's that blank wall that it looks a little battered. They have not tried to make, it looks amazing and it's beautiful, but they have not glamorized it to make everything clean and pristine and Hollywood-esque. Like they have tried to make this as realistic as possible so that you walk around it as a person would, and you can't, have the same, you don't have the sensory connection there, but you can kind of imagine it when it's laid out like this. You can, feel the mud on your shoes and think about all the smells that you would have in these crowded spaces. So I think the fact that they've not only tried to be historically accurate, but they've also been kind of accurate to what a human experience would be to interact with this space is really what makes this one special.
What I heard from students, so this year or last academic year, I assigned some Assassin's Creed gameplay to my students in a class that I was teaching on the ancient world.
Yeah,
and such a good tool, right? It's such an accurate thing for students to they told me that, even though they read words on paper on like, this is how a building looked like and this is how big it was, it's not the same as seeing it as if you're really there, right? Saying that a building is 5 foot tall or I don't know how many meters tall, it's hard to imagine unless you stand there in that video game and you look up and you just see how tall that building is. It's just something that words can never describe, or it would take you, like they say, 1,000 words to describe one image. It's just not the same. And I feel like these kind of video games really give an insight that texts cannot do. And even documentaries cannot do, because documentaries you're watching through somebody else's eye, or you are stuck in what the camera wants to show you. In this kind of video game, you have all the power, you have the agency to walk around, to go wherever you want to go, to look to what you want to see. It just gives you that much more freedom to explore a world that I don't think any other medium that we have today was ever able to do.
Yeah, I think anyone who's played a lot of video games knows this experience of kind of merging with the gameplay, where, if you play this for a few hours, you no longer feel like you're pushing buttons on a controller. You're not conscious of the controller in your hand. You're kind of experiencing the world through the player's eyes, and you're just making choices just like you do in everyday life. Like you're just, moving forward and backwards. And so that level of immersion creates a much more vivid experience than anything else could.
So we got another question in from the audience. Somebody asks, are the visual dimensions that I just talked about, are they somewhat accurate actually? Are these dimensions that you have in the game realistic?
What do you think, Jess?
I think, well, there's a couple of things. So for buildings, yeah. For if you're looking at like the map and space, that's not very realistic because you can move around too quickly for me.
Yeah.
But on the ground, I think the dimensions are pretty accurate. Like, you know, as we've talked about, a lot of these things are being reconstructed, but we have enough, say, temples that can be used as comparanda to be able to see, okay, that would be the relative height of these things. But yeah, I think they do a pretty good job with that.
Yeah, the thing I always go to are plants and animals. So and architecture, of course. I love the way they handled architecture. A lot of these, you know, this is like an elite house, and it's a little bit copy and paste. This is like one model that gets reused throughout the game, but I think it's pretty close to what we can imagine a wealthy person's house being like in Egypt. There are these porches with these, which kind of columns are those? Are those pyriform columns? There's a lot of open space. The less fancy houses are typically made of mud brick. Just going to look at one right now.
Nice flat roof.
Yeah, like thatched with palm leaves, which was quite common. And we do have models of houses. So there are these things called soul houses that are like little clay model houses that we find in tombs. And they look quite similar to what you find in the game. And that's no accident. This is a very typical like indigenous African style of architecture where you use mud bricks. You stack the mud bricks at a little bit of an incline so that they are more stable, and then thatch the top with palm leaves like this. So I hope is it clear to see now, Jess? I'm trying to move really slowly and like spend time at places.
No, that's great. And, you know, I will say also that one of the reasons that we have to use things like soul houses for reconstructing these kind of things is that we don't have a lot of evidence of mud brick houses because mud brick does not survive very well into the modern day. It is, as its name suggests, made of mud, so it crumbles, it degrades over time, but it's also a really good fertilizer. So it got taken apart over the millennia and used as fertilizer for fields. So we don't have a lot of these kind of less wealthy houses to use as information for, you know, how big and these kind of things would have been. We do have one town site called Deir el-Medina that has gives us a great idea of what houses looked like in ancient Egypt, but generally most of our evidence is of wealthy people and temples, places that had money tend to have better material.
Monumental like stone architecture survives much better.
Yeah.
So right now I'm just heading up to Djoser's funerary complex and his step pyramid, which I think they did a really great job on. I'm not an expert on that site by any means, but I have been there and I had to study it for my qualifying exams, as I'm sure you remember.
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
So the step pyramid is so we have the pyramids that we all know about, the Great Pyramids. This one is an earlier version when they were still trying to figure out how to make the pyramid. So it's not cased on the outside, it's not smooth. It's called a step pyramid because it goes up in inclines that you should be able to see on the screen. There we go. But it's part of this huge complex. And this is obviously where the king would have been buried, but there's a lot more going on here. So we'll see where Christian takes us.
I have to kill this guy real quick. He won't stop bothering me.
Just like in real life.
Yeah, if somebody's hassling you, yeah, just send an arrow their way and they'll probably leave you alone. Okay, I was just gonna get someplace where I could actually use Senu. So
Ooh.
for people who haven't played this game, Senu lets you look down on things from above and mark enemies. It's a stealth game primarily. So when you come to a new place, you mark your enemies and then go in and fight them. But it also provides a really neat way to like look down on things. And this whole area that we see in front of us, this is all Djoser's pyramid enclosure. So there was this huge ceremonial space here on the south side that was used for something called the Hebsed Festival, which, as far as I know, Jess, you know better than I do, but like this is basically, it's like a jubilee. It's like the 30-year jubilee of the pharaoh, and he would just like run around like in circles.
Yeah, so it's you have your first one. This is really embarrassing. I forget what exact year. It's around year 30, and then after that, it's like every 3 or 4 years after that. And the idea is essentially, if you've got to 30 years of reigning, you need to have your kingship rejuvenated to kind of help your, I don't know, your kingly juices keep flowing. But then you got to do it every 3 years after that, because if you're living that long, you're near the end of life in Egypt at that age. So yeah, we have some images. We know that there are 2 boundary stones, like 2 markers, and the king would just run between the 2 of them, and that would somehow rejuvenate his kingship. But it was this huge spectacle. And now that you're here, though, one of the things that I love about this game is, again, like I was saying, that they didn't try and make everything polished. This game is set, actually, what is the specific year this is set in? Is it 30, 31?
I think it starts in, oh, I just wrote this down. I just wrote it down. It's either 59 or 69.
Okay, so, well.
BC, so it's.
Yeah. Right towards the end of Egyptian history, right? We have Cleopatra in this game and Caesar. So by this point, the pyramid that we're looking at here is 3,000 years old. And that is why, you can see the bricks starting to crumble. There's sand all over the courtyard. It doesn't look like it was made yesterday. This game is not pretending that all of Egypt is homogeneous and that it was beautiful throughout, and it crumbles over time. This is thousands of years. That civilization was around for thousands and thousands of years. So obviously there is going to be this kind of degradation of the architecture, and that's really well played out here. And I think that's also something really hard for us to comprehend, is that how long and how old this civilization is, and that even to them, even to Egyptians, the Pyramid of Djoser was ancient. That can be really hard for us to understand, but this does a great job of showing that.
Yeah, and even the Giza pyramids were pretty ancient. So there's the Bent Pyramid and other Snefru pyramid. They did a really good job of getting a lot of stuff in here, a lot of the points of interest.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's the Giza pyramids. They're all super old, but then their casing stones are still there. So like they have smooth sides, the sides are weathered, there's chips out of them, but they're smooth on the whole. And that's because they hadn't been removed yet to build the mosques in Cairo.
Oh, that's what happened with the pyramids?
Yeah, and I'm so bad off the cuff at remembering historical details, but it was the Citadel, I know, which is on it's on a bluff on the eastern side of Cairo. So in this game, it would be like way over here somewhere. That is built out of the limestone that cases the pyramids. And that limestone so the pyramids themselves are built out of just out of the material from the Giza Plateau, which is kind of a medium quality limestone, but then they were cased on the outside in this bright white shining limestone from a quarry called Tura, which is actually on the eastern side of the river. And those casing stones had to be quarried and then transported across the river to the pyramid building site. And recently we found text from one of the foremen who was in charge of quarrying and transporting these stones, and he describes the task of bringing them across the river. So, yeah.
Wow.
Pretty neat stuff.
If I may, we got another question coming up. Somebody asks, do you guys feel that the character of Bayek fits into the historical narrative that they're trying to portray? Was he a good choice?
Mostly yes. So he's described as a Magi, which is a little strange because the Bija are actually a like an ethnic group who live in, let's see, oh sorry, I can't really do that. They live in southeastern Egypt today, unlike near the border with Sudan, or you know, straddling the border between Egypt and Sudan. And they have their own language and history. And during the New Kingdom, they were employed as security forces in Upper Egypt. So that's where, you know, the 1990s Mummy movie uses the Magi as like the sacred guardians of the mummy. That's taken from actual history. They were employed as a security force. They were sort of marginalized, non-Egyptian people that would like launch raids onto the Nile Valley, and to prevent that, the state hired them as security. So they became the de facto police force of ancient Thebes. Bayek is supposed to be half Nubian and half Egyptian, and he lives in Siwa, which is like the opposite direction, right? Siwa is way out in the Western desert. I'm not sure how all that backstory works, but yeah, I think he works pretty well. I read that somewhere recently in like a fan post. But you can kind of tell when you look at him, his skin tone is definitely darker than average, you know, when you're interacting with people in the game. Yeah.
Cool. So we like him.
I like Bayek a lot. Yeah, he's a good character.
Somebody asked, do you think archaeogaming as a general field is a good way of reviving interest in ancient studies in primary schools and in high schools, etc.?
Yeah, I think it is doing the job of Hollywood movies did for us in the 90s and early 2000s, right? That's what it is today. I think it's a good way of reviving it. I don't know how successful it is right now because I don't know primary schools. I don't know if primary school kids are playing this. I'm not sure.
I don't think so. I mean, this game has a lot of violence and even a fair amount of like sexuality. I don't think I would recommend it to a primary school kid.
Well, Fortnite also has a lot of violence.
True.
And 5-year-olds play Fortnite.
Yeah, and there are other games. Assassin's Creed Origins isn't the only
Right.
ancient Egyptian game.
Right.
But I think you can
I
talk
have
to the
asked
question,
students
right?
in my class, undergraduate university students, how they felt about playing Assassin's Creed. And there were a couple of people who said like, yeah, I've been playing this in middle school, high school. And it was one of the reasons why I'm now not majoring in ancient studies or classical studies, but at least taking a class in it, because I was so interested in that culture through those video games. And I at some point wanted to learn more and just take a class on ancient Egypt or on ancient Rome because of video games. So I do think it can spark some sort of interest in historical periods.
But I think, Christian, you can talk to that because you are quite active on Reddit, right? And you answer questions on this. So like, what do you feel like you're getting, what kind of questions do you get based on this? And do you think it's reviving interest, or is it just, are you just getting things from like hardcore gamers who want to know?
A little bit of both. I think, I don't think you really create interest in ancient Egypt. I think it's just kind of like dormant in the population and you activate it. So, you know, anyone who has a fascination with Egypt, it kind of really just takes like one encounter for you to discover that fascination. So this provides an opportunity to do that. It's a way to reach people that might not ever encounter these things any other way. And so that can be really valuable. A lot of people are more focused on the gameplay aspects. And I think that is, you know, I don't see that as a loss to Egyptology. I think that's, you know, that's where their interests lie, and we don't really have any control over that. I think the thing that we do have control over is whether the stuff that we do is accessible to people who are interested. And that's a place where Egyptology has honestly done a pretty poor job thus far. The subject itself can really only be studied at a few universities. Most of them are really elite, expensive universities. A lot of the material is, it's rare, it can be expensive. There's just not a lot out there for someone who takes a casual interest in this subject. And I think by us talking about this game, we're creating that connection. So like if you are interested in ancient Egypt, just as a matter of like personality and taste, and you play this game and look up things about this game, well, us being here now, we provide a point of connection where you can find other resources if that's what you want to do. And that's not going to be everyone, but for those people, it can be really important.
Right, because I remember as a child, I received as a birthday gift this like hieroglyph stamp set where I could put some hieroglyphs in stamp and ink and then write my name out in ancient Egypt. But that was pretty much the only thing that was around, and I'm talking like pre-internet times.
Yeah.
There was just no access to any of that as like a 10-year-old living in the middle of nowhere in Europe. Like there was nothing. So I'm super happy to see that these media are embracing the ancient world and bringing it into your living room.
Mm-hmm.
And then especially with the discovery tours, because we haven't even talked about the discovery tours yet in these games, which I think everybody who's watching this knows. These games have these additional thing called discovery tours, which is set in the game, but they're not gameplay. It's just you walking around in the game map without enemies, without any quests, and you can freely walk and do whatever you want. And then at certain points you can stop and a little narrative will start explaining what you see to you. So it's basically walking around in a open air museum with one of those headsets on where you can just hear information being told to you from a guide on what you see and what you're experiencing. That to me is really brilliant. I mean, if I would have had that as a 12-year-old, I would have studied everything that I could from those discovery tours, learning about the ancient culture and material culture, et cetera, et cetera. That is something that I could only dream of as a child. So Christian is accessing the discovery tour right now.
Yeah, I was just going to go take a look at, oh, I can't click like that.
I just thought that was such a brilliant addition to these Assassin's Creed games.
Yeah, I love it. I feel like there's value to both actually. And like, I should have brought it up in my paper because I think that there is value to the main game for scholars as well. I think that there's really something to be said for just being in a place. So for me personally, I travel quite a bit for like academic purposes. Like I might go to an academic conference in Europe or something. And those are my favorite trips. I love visiting a foreign city and having something to do there. I don't really like being a tourist. I like having a purpose and then I'm just experiencing the place. It's sort of incidentally to whatever it is that I happen to be working on. That gives you a different sense of place than like, going and taking a tour does. So I think there's value to both. The Discovery Tour is really cool. It's full of great educational material. The game itself is also full of great educational material, but you might not realize it because it's totally incidental. You have a quest, you have something you need to accomplish, but you're still interacting with this place and experiencing it the entire time.
That's what educators love, right? They are learning, but it's sneaky. They have no idea that they're being educated.
Very true. Oh my gosh, it's talking to me.
We can't hear it, so you're all good.
And these discovery tours were really awesome to assign to students because they can go and do 1 or 2 discovery tours on their own and then write down their interpretations without having to play the entire game, especially for people who aren't very familiar with gameplay. Or they can get inspired to write a paper on a certain topic that they saw. So they're very good educational tools.
Yeah, and I'm just demonstrating quickly, like kind of how it works. There are these waypoints. I think I missed a waypoint actually. Yeah, I did. So you just stop at these points and it tells you some things. Oh, I forgot to press start here.
Actually, this is the one that I give my students. We read the ancient texts about how Alexandria was planned, because we have a planned city here. And that's one of those things, you know, you can read the text and you say, okay, well, this road ran through here, and you can kind of imagine it, but then you send them in here and you can kind of look up and be like, oh, okay, it all makes sense now spatially.
Mm. Yeah, somebody asked, do you also think learning incidentally would be an easier way of getting students to retain information? I think for sure video games make it easier to retain information. I remember having to memorize on a map where every single important city of ancient Greece was. And it took me so long just to remember that dot is that city, that dot is that city. If you play a game like this and you have to check the map constantly to see where your character is going, you know where each city is without having to memorize it.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's such an, it makes it much
It might take longer overall than just directly memorizing it, but it will feel a lot shorter because it's so much less tedious.
And it retains better. Because I'm also a visual learner. I see the map in my head and I will never forget it, which is on what coast, etc. Where I don't know the cities anymore from 10 years ago that I had to learn on a white blank map.
Yeah.
And yeah, learning incidentally, you are always learning. So I am a big advocate for any game being used for educational purposes, because you're always learning something. If not the historical background, you learn about strategies and how to solve puzzles and how to come up with solutions. If you're playing like me in a different language, you learn a language while you are playing. So I think, yeah, any video game can teach you something incidentally. That is a skill for life.
Yeah.
Here's a map.
I was just going to pick a different place. Let's see. Temples and priests. Mummies. That sounds interesting.
Oh, mummies, that sounds cool.
Yeah, everybody loves mummies. I've never really been into mummies personally. But that's the thing that gets people interested first.
Right.
I was always terrified of them as a kid. Like they still creep me out.
I used to work in a museum in the Netherlands, and people would always come and ask, where are the mummies? Especially children. Point them to the mummy hall. People are fascinated by it.
Have you seen this question in the chat, Christian? How much time do you spend debunking conspiracy theories online? I would also like to know the answer to this.
Almost zero, because I don't really have any interest in debunking. Oh my gosh, a child is shouting. Sorry, I know you guys can't hear it, but it's super distracting. Okay, I don't really believe in debunking conspiracy theories, honestly. I think that I think that if you're sharing that conspiracy theory, it's because you find the subject interesting and you haven't been able to find good information. So the best way to debunk ancient Egypt conspiracy theories is just to provide people with the stuff we know. Like, just show them all the evidence we have, and there will be very few conspiracy theorists left. I think there will be a few people like Stitchin and Hancock and these guys who are actually making a pretty solid living off of writing these books. And they're just kind of like locked into their way of seeing things. Those guys aren't really going to ever change their minds, but they don't need to. They can believe what they want to believe. For all the people who are interested in the subject and are finding their bad information instead, the easiest way we can counter that, and the best thing we can do for those people, is just provide them with better information. So for a long time, I've seen conspiracy theories as evidence of our failure as academics, because academia is embedded in a broader society. We don't get to live in ivory towers. We don't have the funding to live in ivory towers, frankly. So we have an obligation to society to share what we do. And if we aren't living up to that, then people will come in and fill the gap. And that's kind of what's happened with a lot of conspiracy theories. So yeah, that was a debunking right there. And it's not really a debunking. It's just saying, like, if you're interested in this, here's some other information that you might want to look at.
For many people, it's often a first entrance, right? Especially when I was teaching the Dead Sea Scrolls, a lot of my students said, well, I heard about this mystery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and all its secrets it contains. I want to take a class on it. Then of course I have to say, sorry, there are no secrets in it, and no, Jesus is not in here, and the Vatican is not trying to cover up anything. But thank you for your interest. Here is what it is, and what we can learn from it. So
yeah, and maybe that person is interested in what's actually in there, and they never would have known otherwise, because they never would have picked it up and looked at it without that conspiracy theory. So yeah.
Okay, show us some more ancient Egyptian life, Christian. What do we have here?
I'm just going to walk around. Oh, I didn't really want to do this.
One of the questions was, is he in a poppy field? And I know that you like to talk about the flora and fauna.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to talk about that a little bit, because I know you have some insight on that.
I definitely was in a poppy field at some point, and it is a poppy field. So those are Papaver somniferum, the opium poppy that was cultivated in Ptolemaic Egypt for the production of opium. So we know that that's a realistic thing that you might have seen. There are papyrus thickets like this one that I'm in right now, where you had standing or shallow water. You get stands of papyrus, which was used to make ancient Egyptian paper. There are lots of date palms. So here are some date palms. I've never made a complete list of all the plant and animal species I found in here. I normally just highlight a few examples to illustrate it. But this is one of the things that really sells it. It seems secondary, but in terms of your experience of the place, palm trees towering above you, papyrus thickets in the shallows, and then interspersed with realistic looking architecture, that's what creates a sense of place. That's how you can step out of an airport in San Diego or New York and know immediately where you are. So getting that stuff right, I know that's something that Ubisoft cared a lot about, and they were right to care, because that's what really sells the environment.
Yeah, somebody asked, Christian, did you have any conversation with the game creators? And I know you have been in contact with them at some point, right?
Yeah, I interviewed them a couple of years ago when I was first writing about this. And it was a good interview. They were really kind to take the time to talk to me about some of their decisions. It's always difficult to ask a creator why they did something, because the truth often is that people don't always know. So I had a lot of questions along the lines of like, why did you choose the name Bayek? And I didn't know at the time, but it's because it's based on an ancient Egyptian word that means falcon. And it is generally true in the Assassin's Creed world that the main characters have like bird of prey names. So they chose this word, Middle Egyptian beak or Coptic bek, that means falcon. And then when I asked like, well, okay, why the vocalization Bayek? Where did you come up with that pronunciation? Because we don't actually know what the Middle Egyptian would have sounded like. They said, well, we named him Bayek because we didn't want to call him bike, because that sounded too much like bicycle. And I was like, okay, but that, like I can see how from like their perspective as the creators, like you can almost see them having a conversation in a room with a whiteboard and being like, well, we can't go with bike, so let's make it a little more substantial. Let's make it Bayek. But then like, well, why not bake? Why not back? And like, I don't know that anyone knows the answer to those kind of questions.
Right.
So, yeah,
so that kind of shows how games are they still need to be fun, and they still need to be commercialized. They can't be that historically correct that it takes away from fun gameplay or from weird English translations, etc. There's still concessions to be made.
And they have to get them out at some point. When you're creating any work of art, there's a saying I like, a work of art is never finished, it's only abandoned. Like you have to make decisions and go with them sometimes. So that's what I found in my interview too. It was more like asking an artist why they made certain artistic decisions, because the history and the evidence they had down. It was the things that, it was the gaps where they had to fill gaps, where they got to be creative. And I don't think any living person can actually explain all of those choices.
I imagine with his name, it's the same when this is in other languages as well. So I'm sure that has something to, some impact here as well. It needs to be able to be vocalized in languages other than English.
Yeah. It has to not mean something offensive and like all those concerns.
Right. Because so the person asked, are they Egyptologists themselves? So the game makers are not Egyptologists, but they hire Egyptologists, right? Or they hired specialists, historians to help them out with all these details? Yeah.
And they did a ton of research on their own too. I know that one of the game creators is originally from Morocco, and he, I forget his exact role, so I hope he'll forgive me if I'm misrepresenting him, but I know that things like the way it feels to be inside a house, well, this one has no cushions or pillows. A lot of these, habitable rooftops have like cushions and pillows on them and things. And he took that from his experience of Morocco. And yeah, there's a little rug and straw pillows to sit on. And that's probably a pretty good way to do it because they have very similar climates. People live in very similar ways, like they sleep on the roofs when it's hot. So he took a lot from his own practical experience and just kind of imported that to flesh out the skeleton that Egyptology provides. So I imagine his research looked something like, Googling for things and getting kind of the outline of the facts and then fleshing it out from experience and all that kind of stuff.
And doing ethnographic work, I would assume, because there's still communities living in very similar fashions these days that you can go and visit.
Yeah, but I do know that no one on the team actually traveled to Egypt in making this game. Wow. I specifically asked that, and it's really stunning to me because there's this phenomenon that I don't have a word for, but it's like, I normally liken it to the sense of smell. It's like how certain cities have almost kind of like a metaphorical smell to them. Like there's a memory association and there's like a sense of place and there's kind of a spirit. Yeah, ambiance maybe. And they got that right. So I've spent a lot of time personally in Cairo and Alexandria, and the Alexandria in this game feels like real life Alexandria with older buildings. Like the lighting, the light reflecting off the sea and everything. It just, I get that sense of place there. And no one who made it actually traveled to Alexandria.
That's amazing. So they made all these buildings just based on pictures and plans and maps that they had, but they had no idea if this is what reality is still.
Yeah.
Wow.
Pretty amazing. This is linen or flax. Flax blooms with these really pretty blue flowers, which in ancient Egyptian are called awan impeh, which means color of sky. So I think that's kind of nice.
So Alexander asked, he says, one thing I loved about Odyssey was that it referenced and used ancient Greek text. Is the same true for Origins with Egyptian, Greek, Latin text that they use? Oh
yeah, very much so. There are little like Easter eggs peppered or scattered throughout the story that are taken from Egyptian texts. So my favorite one personally is that when you go to the underworld, there are underworlds for different pharaohs, and you go to Ramses the Great's underworld, and you meet his son, Hamwas, in the underworld, and you have to help him with some sort of quest. But Setna Hamwas is really famous in Egyptology as the first Egyptologist. So he was the fourth son of Ramses the Great. Sorry, we're having some video streaming issues. He was the fourth son of Ramses the Great. He was a priest of Ptah in Memphis. And there are a lot of ancient Egyptian fictional stories about him as this like wise kind of wizard character who would travel around and collect magical ancient texts and go on adventures. And he's a character in this game. So they clearly were aware of this narrative cycle from ancient Egypt and incorporated it.
That's great.
That's pretty cool.
So where are you now in the game?
I'm still in Memphis. I was just kind of walking
What is
around
your favorite place, Christian and Jess, in this game? Oh, Christian, we lost you. We lost your voice.
I was just thinking.
I don't think I've played it enough to have a favorite. Because I get really into it and I just keep doing my quests and going where it tells me to go. I don't go back and forth to like.
Was there a place that you were like, wow, this is so?
I mean, it's super cliche, but I mean, you know, Giza and seeing the pyramids and seeing them in a state that I've never seen them before, right?
Right.
That really impressed me.
I'm going to my favorite place right now, and it's like, it's not really a major part of the game, but for whatever reason, I just really, so one of the things I always try to tell people, especially people who haven't spent a lot of time in Egypt and are just interested in the subject, you know, we've seen plenty of Hollywood movies where they are in Egypt and they're really like Indiana Jones.
Right.
You know, they're supposed to be in Tanis and they are really somewhere in Tunisia near the Great Sand Sea. So it's very arid. It's very sort of North African. There are all these like white plastered buildings and not a lot of trees and stuff. Egypt actually isn't like that. So Egypt, of course, the modern state is this big like trapezoid shape that includes a lot of desert, but the experience of the country, like where people actually live, is along the Nile River or in the Delta. And those places are actually really lush and fertile. They're not arid. They're watered by the river. That's why people live there. And my absolute favorite thing about this game is that it captures that. It captures like this sort of place, which I wouldn't characterize as being arid at all. This is a very like lush green foresty type of environment.
Yeah.
And it's totally realistic. If you spend a lot of time in Egypt, unless you're an archaeologist and you're out in the desert at a dig house, if you're actually just like in Egyptian towns and cities, this is what it feels like to be in the place. It doesn't feel like a desert at all. So yeah, so this is probably my favorite, are these like little pockets of forest and things.
That's beautiful. You would just want to lay out in the grass and enjoy the sunshine on your face.
The falcon on your forearm.
You can see the breeze, you know, in the leaves and in the grass. It just feels like you just can jump into your screen and be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable how well they did with this.
Someone asked, what do you think of the representation of the female characters in the game? Because I know this one doesn't have a female main character yet, right? In comparison to the Odyssey later, in which you can play as a female character.
Yeah, you do play as Aya for a brief part of the main quest, but for the most part, you play as Bayek and you don't have a choice about it. So you play a male character. I think I'm gonna pass that question along to you two. What do y'all think?
I mean, remind me if I'm wrong, but you don't really even interact with that many main character women in this, do you? You have her, and then you have Cleopatra, who is a very stereotypical representation of Cleopatra as being this very sexy, sultry lady. Other than those two, who else is there? I mean, that's the kind of the bigger issue than whether those two are correct.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the ratio is of like interaction with male to female characters. I mean, once you exclude Bayek, of course, because that obviously tips the scales pretty profoundly.
I mean, of those two women, you've got, I mean, Aya and Cleopatra are the kind of polar opposites. So I don't think you can say it kind of the game is leaning one way or the other. You have here really strong kind of female version of Bayek, essentially, right? She's a strong, Magi, kick-ass lady. And then you have Cleopatra, who is the beautiful, cunning, sultry one. So you know, it's all, I think it's a bit stereotypical, but
And there's also the
doesn't offend
God's
me.
wife of Amun in Thebes.
Okay,
She's
I
also
haven't.
kind of yeah, she's kind of a politician and she's kind of up to no good. There are quite a few female characters that I can remember. And they are quite diverse in terms of personality. They're not, you know, Cleopatra obviously embodies that stereotype because really, how could she not? Yeah, I don't know.
I think that comes down to this debate that we have been having in the archaeogaming field area on how many women do you want to portray in ancient historical video games and why, etc. I'm talking about there's this one group of people who think, well, there weren't many great female warrior leaders or military leaders or kings or queens. So if you want to be historically correct, we can't have that many in our video games. While there are other people who say, well, that's just because you focus on topics like politics and military games, which were predominantly male oriented or dominated. So you could just make a video game that are more about the women and what they did in history, and then you would be able to have more female characters. There are also people who say, well, you don't have to go that realistic. You can make a female counter character for every male character that you make, even though that wasn't reality, but then at least we can get to play with women. So there are different opinions about this matter, and how much do you want to have female representation in historical video games, which I find interesting.
Yeah, that's really difficult because you have on the one hand a game like this that is clearly trying to be very historically accurate.
Right.
And that's great. And the sources that we have are mostly from the male perspective, right?
Right.
But on the other hand, if this is a game that the public are playing and kids are playing, we shouldn't also be perpetuating that idea that you don't really interact with women that much and that women only have these certain roles, right? So if something like this is being marketed towards younger generations as well, it's something to think about, you know, how we educating, especially if we are using this as an educational tool, how are we educating these people to interact in society?
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult. I don't have an answer for it.
Yeah, I don't have the answer. I think to the point that, you know, if we are using this as an educational tool, I don't think you can hide from that fact. Like if you're producing any kind of fiction, there is a didactic component to it. You have something that you want to say, and whether you make it overt or not, it's going to be embedded in that experience, and it's going to reach the people who experience it. So you have to take responsibility for the fact that you are essentially, you're socializing or educating people into a certain view of the world. That's totally inevitable. I think when you're talking about narratives that include ancient women, you have this big problem of like I have this problem. So I'm writing a historical fantasy novel right now. I'm more than halfway done with the first draft, and there's a strong female character in the story, and I wrote all of her backstory and everything, but it's actually much more difficult because you have to define what your character wants at all times, because that determines like how they make choices and things. And it's kind of harder to say what ancient women want because we just don't have that much evidence of them going out and getting what they want. Whereas for ancient men, I wanted to conquer this place and I came here with my army and I left this stone. You know, we have all this evidence of them pursuing their desires. Right.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just thinking about my own field of scholarship, the ancient Israelites. All we have is, you know, from the Hebrew Bible and from other texts, what the high priests are doing and what the kings are doing and the rulers and the military strategists and the prophets and the fathers, the desert fathers, etc., etc. Women are wives, daughters, slaves. but we don't really know what drives them. We assume that they all want to have big families with a lot of children, and that's their main occupation. But was that really? I can't imagine everybody wanted that in their lives. What else? It's hard to figure it out.
Yeah, it's difficult. But I think that's where I say that all of these different things have value. Like Jess, you were mentioning before this dilemma of like, do you make it historically accurate and portray this as a male-dominated society and then risk perpetuating that worldview on a new generation of actual living people today? Or do you make the world more egalitarian and sacrifice historical accuracy? I would say that you do both. Sometimes you do one, sometimes you do the other. And because both have value, like the act of trying to create that ahistorical egalitarian world forces you to ask questions that you might not have thought of before. Like, what do ancient women want?
Right, exactly. Especially in a game as Assassin's Creed, those main characters aren't realistic anyway. There were no mercenaries traveling around mingling in all kind of political affairs at that time. So who cares if it's a man or a woman? The whole thing is made up anyway.
Yeah, and I think audiences actually have a really easy time of telling the parts that are made up from the parts that aren't, because we willingly suspend our disbelief, but our brains don't fall out when we read a story.
Yeah.
We can accept that there's magic in this world, but we don't like forget that there's a line between magic and things that actually exist in our world.
Yeah. Oh, look at that beautiful ship passing by while we're talking. Did you like the ships in the game, Christian?
For the most part, yeah. I think they did a good job. There's not a huge variety. There's actually just a few models that they repeat. But they did a good job. Yeah.
About something else, somebody asked the question, was the contemporary spoken Egyptian language very different from Saitic Coptic? And I don't know anything about Egyptian languages, so I assume that you understand what this is asking about.
Yeah, the spoken language at this time would have been less like Saitic and Bohairic and maybe more like Akhmimic. So if you've looked at any Akhmimic texts and compared them with the Saitic and Bohairic dialects, you can see that the vowel shift, like the A to O vowel shift, didn't occur. And we know from old Coptic texts written during the early part of the Common Era, like during the Greco-Roman period, we know that they don't represent that A to O vowel shift when they transcribe like demotic text with the Greek alphabet. So we can imagine that that hadn't happened everywhere yet, and it hadn't caught on. So like Saitic is really the urban dialect of Coptic Egypt, and it probably took root sometime later than this. So it would have been more like Akhmimic on the whole, I guess. That's a very rough estimate, but it definitely would have been a lot more like Coptic than the reconstructed dialogue in this game. That's the one place where they kind of phoned it in. They didn't think anyone would care about whether the ancient Egyptian language was real. And I think that was just a miscalculation on their part. Because if you look at, the Assassin's Creed Origins subreddit, there are 100 posts asking like, what does it mean when they say this phrase over and over? And half the time it's like, it's actually just kind of gibberish because they just threw some random words together and mispronounced them. So yeah, that's the one category where I would score this a needs improvement.
Interesting. I wonder what they're going to do for the Valhalla one. They're going to bring some old Norwegian in.
Yeah, that'd be cool. They could hire some Icelandic speakers.
Yeah, I took one semester of Old Norwegian at university a long time ago because I wanted to learn about runen and the other weird inscriptions. Just one semester though, never got really good. The person thanks you for your detailed answer on the language, Christian.
Sure, anytime.
Anything
like
else
my
you want
MO
to
is like,
we have about
no, I don't think we've missed anything.
We have about 5 minutes left. Is there anything else that you?
Let's go underwater for a second.
Oh, you can.
I love the
that.
fully developed underwater worlds too. They're pretty awesome. There's even recognizable fish sometimes, like the Nile perch was a really common. I think that was one right there. If you study hieroglyphs, you see all of these very iconic shapes in the glyphs. And of course, they're based on reality. Like the ancient Egyptians were keen observers of nature, and they incorporated observation of nature into their art. So if you study hieroglyphs and you're reading words, you're not necessarily thinking about what the animal is. But then when you play this game, you see that exact same like hieroglyphic shape in an animal that's running around. It's really neat.
I tried to go scuba diving once in Alexandria, and the water looked like the water you were just in, so I didn't get very far.
Yep.
I got too scared. I'd done it before in Greece, where it's crystal clear, beautiful. Tried it in Alexandria. No.
Pretty murky. It's all the river silt and algae and stuff. So Lauren says we have to say plugs for ourselves. So I guess I'll just jump in. Like I said, I'm a postdoc at ISAW. I don't really know what I could plug. A draft of the first chapter of my novel is online, and you guys can go read that. And if anyone's curious, I could put you on a mailing list so you can get something about that when that's ready.
You have a link for that, Christian, that you can put in the chat?
I'll have to get one, which means I'll stop sharing. Just get a link. As far as like academic work goes, it mostly ends up on like academia or in our CVs. But Jess or Tina, do you have plugs?
I got nothing to sell. My academia was posted at the beginning, so you can find articles and things on there. But if my email is also on there, if anybody ever has any questions, you can just email me. Happy to answer questions about stuff.
I'm gonna plug that I'm looking for a job.
Yeah.
No, also other stuff. Yeah, so keep following the SASA events and announcements. We will have a lot more coming up. As for me personally, my website was giving in the beginning of this chat. Follow me on Twitter. My name is Tine, Tina underscore RASS. I can also put it in the chat. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, I am actually looking for a job. I'm kidding, but I'm finishing up my dissertation hopefully this year if COVID ever goes away. And then I need to find a job in the US with with my background, which is not going to be easy. But it would be amazing if I could do something with video games and archaeology history somewhere. But I think that's a dream for everybody, and none of us have jobs. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Don't have much else to plug. I see that somebody put the link to Christian's book in the chat, so that is there now. Okay, good. So yeah, if you have any suggestions for games that you would like to have featured.
Coming back for a second, I just realized that I should say extra stuff about SASA, right? So people who RSVP'd, we're about to send out an email with an evaluation form. So please, in that, one of the questions is recommending games for us to highlight in future events, or you can always just email us. I'm the live events coordinator, so feel free to email me suggestions for games or books that we can try to get in contact with the author with, or if anyone, I know a lot of people watching are PhD students and stuff. If you want to lead any of these events or co-host them and stuff, please contact me and let me know. Okay, but also more importantly, someone asked if you can pet the cats in the video game. So that's what I actually came back on to ask that.
I think if you stand still next to them, Bayek will bend down and pet them. Yeah.
Okay. You're not allowed to kill them, right?
Yeah, so innocent people and cats are the only creatures that you're not allowed to kill.
Okay, that's kind of amazing. And the exact
Animals fine, cats no.
But yeah, okay. Go to saveancientstudies.org and the events page to RSVP to more events. Thank you guys so much for hosting. It was a lot of work getting this stuff ready to do this archaeogaming event, so they deserve like amazing award medals for doing this. Thank you guys, and thank you everyone who came and watched us and left awesome comments and questions. Please join us. We have events at the same time, 2 p.m. EST, basically every Saturday. So yeah, I think that's
Awesome.
about it, and we can hop off now. I think I'm the one to end the streaming too, so I just want to let you know because it's probably going to end it for everyone. So bye guys.
Bye, guys.